grandfather's house is still there, but it isn't the same. A plain wooden cottage, a patch of brown lawn, and a fence that hangs bending and sighing in the Seattle rain. I drive by with strangers and wish I could see what I see. A tangle of summer birds flying in sunlight, a forest of lilies, an orchard of apricot trees, secret gardens of the heart where the flowers bloom forever. I see you shining through the night, through the ice and cold of winter. Great-grandfather's farm is still there, but it isn't the same. The barn is torn down and the fences are gone, and the Idaho winds blow the topsoil away every spring. I still see the ghosts of the people I knew long ago. Inside the old kitchen, they bend and they sigh. My life passed them up, and the world in its way passed them by. Secret gardens of the heart, where the old stay young forever. I see you shining through the night, through the ice and snow of winter. But mostly it's me that has changed, yet still I'm the same. That's me at the weddings, that's me at the graves. I'm dressed like the people who once looked so grown up and brave. I look in the mirror through the eyes of the child that was me. I see willows bending, the season is spring, and the silver blue sailing birds fly with the sun on their wings. Secret gardens of the heart, where the old stay young forever. I see you shining through the night, through the ice and snow of winter.
I bring you a real treat this morning. I'll start with just a quick story that connects what's about to happen to my life and work here at Fountain Street. As many of you know, this is my second tour at Fountain Street. I served here for 3.5 years back in the early 2000s, and then was lucky enough to interview again to be here again. And I have the greatest job in the world. As a part of that interview process, I sat at dinner with the search team, and they asked a couple of unscripted questions, one of which was, if you could invite anyone to speak from at our historic church, who would it be? And my answer was Ed Dobson. Many of you know him as the senior pastor of Calvary Church, and a very powerful man in the world of evangelicalism, a voice that many paused and said, why in the world would you want that voice to speak here? It is because this place is what it is that I thought that voice could be heard. And so today we're lucky enough to hear the voice of Ed's son. As many of you know, Ed passed away recently, and this community, Fountain Street and the whole of the community, I think really did understand what a great gift his life was in many ways, allowing us to see his journey, especially in his later years. And so this morning, I welcomed the realization of something I thought would never happen. The good son has come to offer his wisdom. He's not his dad. He's himself. And he is the former teaching pastor at Mars Hill Bible Church, that small little place that meets in a parking lot in Granville. Yeah. Welcome this morning to someone I've just enjoyed so much in the day, in the short period since we just met. Kent spent a good deal of time living and studying in Israel, a place, as you know, I have been recently moved powerfully by. I hope this morning that you will receive his good word as the opportunity to hear and to see more good made real upon the earth. Kent.
Voices. I stepped down from my role at Mars Hill down the street in Granville. Only 2 weeks ago, I thought I was kind of done with sermons, but here I am 2 weeks later at Fountain Street. I'm very excited. What an amazing community. I've heard a lot of good things over the years. I've heard a lot of people say negative things, but when I heard them, they sounded good to me. So, and what an awesome building. Joseph Campbell, the great scholar, talks about how buildings, that architecture itself lifts the human spirit up, and you feel in a place like this. So I'm honored to be here, and I'd like to give a little chat. As you know, I come from the evangelical kind of tradition, whatever that is. That is quickly becoming a question. What is evangelical Christianity? And so to be told you're given 20 to 25 minutes sounds like a warm-up, but I'll try to give a brief enough chat. I entitled my talk this morning, Hints and Guesses, and if you are a T.S. Eliot fan, you may recognize that line comes from one of his poems, the Four Quartets, I believe. And I won't give you the full line, but the one that was sticking in my mind was, he says, these are only hints and guesses, hints followed by guesses. That's T.S. Eliot's line. These are only hints and guesses, hints followed by guesses. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you some hints and guesses. This line describes my own sort of spiritual landscape at present. I am operating in a world of hints and guesses. It's the territory that I feel like I'm wandering around in. And I also think that at least reflects or mirrors something else that's going on in contemporary spirituality and in Western Christianity. More and more people are inhabiting this space of hints and guesses. We seem to know less and less. Even as we live in the age of information, and we can find out more information on our phones than most of human history ever had access to or ever really even knew about. But somehow we're operating in the land of hints and guesses, and something is afoot in the church. Church by any definition. A church like this or Mars Hill or whatever, Calvary or any place, something is shifting majorly, and we're all feeling it. And we're all wondering what's going to happen. And if you pay attention to the Pew Forum, you know that people are leaving the church in droves. They're just gone. They're gone. They're on their own path. And part of that is to be celebrated. I'm not one that's trying to, circle the wagons and say don't go anywhere. I think it's a period where there's a lot to be discovered, a lot to be celebrated. But the church has to do its own wrestling match with all this kind of stuff. So that's kind of the landscape I'm inhabiting of hints and guesses. Something that strikes me as true or true enough is the very word God is giving a lot of us trouble and has been giving us a lot of trouble for a while. In fact, sometimes I feel it's as if we don't know what we mean by God anymore. And if you listen to the psalmist, or this may be in Job, I can't remember which. I think it's in the Psalms. The psalmist says, I lift up my eyes to the stars, to the heavens, and the question the psalmist asks is, who created all these? Right? Look up at the stars. Now, you probably, if you have ever lived in an area where there's no light pollution, have wondered the same sort of thing. Or you might not say who created all these, you might say something like, what is this place? What is this place? Who am I? How did any of us get here? That's a question from the psalmist that I think is rooted in wonder. And if you're fans of Abraham Heschel, the Jewish philosopher, rabbi, he says all religion at its best is grounded in wonder. The starting place for religion is wonder. And he means religion in the positive sense. I know religion gets a bad name these days, but he means it in the most positive sense. In religion means to rebind. And a religious or spiritual person, I might say, has his or her grounding in that same space of wonder. Who created all these? But here's the problem. The psalmist was looking up at the universe as he or she knew it. This kind of tiered universe. They're looking at this. The problem is that we've been up there. And the question, who created all these, is a whole lot more complicated now. And we've ventured out to space and found that God wasn't out there. We didn't bump into him just past, the moon. There you are. You've been hiding all these years. Something about the universe is a sort of existential wake-up call, which is probably why Darwin is on the wall. It's an existential wake-up call. What is this place? How did any of us get here? In fact, maybe you're fans of Bill Bryson. I like his little book, A Short History of Nearly Everything. And he says, if you take our galaxy, which is the Milky Way, and shrink it down to the size of a pea. Now imagine that for a minute. Our galaxy, the Milky Way, shrink it down to the size of a pea and put it in the Van Andel. He doesn't say the Van Andel, I'm saying that. Put it in the Van Andel arena. There it is. It's sitting down there, size of a pea. And then you shrink all the other galaxies that we know of, that we mathematically know of, down to the size of a pea. It would fill up the arena. Now, who created all these? We don't even know what we mean by the word all. What do you mean all? Who created all these? The universe is far more complicated and vast. And you could say the same if you go in the other direction, toward the micro, toward the atom, toward electrons and all that sort of stuff. And also about the human psyche and consciousness and brain and being. In other words, we know more about what it means to be human and more about the universe than at any point in history. So the question, who created all these, is a lot more existentially frightening. That's the way I would put it. That's why I say we don't know what we mean by God anymore. We don't know exactly what we mean. Because some of our old ways of conceiving of the divine have been collapsing for a couple hundred years. And I say, let's enjoy the collapse. I don't mean it's like, oh, what fun, it's collapsing. I mean, we can go along with such a movement, or we can resist it at all costs and say this cannot happen, which a lot of well-meaning spiritual communities try to do. Cling. I'm gonna cling with an iron grip on what I've known and the images and ideas I have about God. When maybe it's a time for some letting go, for some hints and guesses, for something new to begin to emerge. In fact, I think about religious communities as being like an ecosystem, rather than even an institution. I know they're institutionalized, and this is an institution, and institutions aren't, necessarily bad, but they're more like ecosystems in the sense that they're filled with human beings, and they kind of tend to go through cycles and phases. And at certain times, certain things sprout, and certain things thrive, and at other times, things die, and weeds come in, and a new species of trees is what begins to thrive, or whatever the case may be. You understand the metaphor. It's more like an ecosystem, and I think that's a more healthy image for what religious communities are really like. But that means you can't control everything in the ecosystem. Like you can't control your kids. I have kids now. I can't control them. I try, but I cannot control them. And young people who are really just out of institutional church, a lot of them, they're on their merry way. We can't control them either. Now, we can either be the kind of place that invites that sort of conversation, or is the kind of place that welcomes the diversity of the ecosystem, or we can try to make it all the same, which I see happening in a lot of churches. It doesn't seem to work very well. And one of the things I think actually, whoever was giving the, I don't know what it was called, was talking a bit about, maybe it was in the welcome, a bit about the historic place that this community is held in the community, which I think is important. She said she was recovering from, I'll just use my words, toxic images of God or toxic religious environments. I don't think she used the word toxic, I am. And one of the things I think the religious ecosystem is responsible for doing right now in the 21st century is trying to weed out some of those toxic images of God. Things that are no longer helping, are no longer helping people live full lives, compassionate, loving lives with their friends and neighbors and relatives, and maybe even their enemies, although that seems far out of reach at present. So weeding out some of those toxic images of God. In other words, sometimes you got to clean up the ecosystem a little bit, and you can participate in that. You can cooperate with that. What do I mean by toxic images of God? Well, you probably know a lot of them, and that is the punitive deity who dangles reward or punishment out in front of people in the afterlife somewhere and is ready to strike you at any moment. I don't think this image of God is helpful anymore, even though he's hanging around, and it's a he usually, is hanging around. And I think we have some responsibility to say, where did that come from? Is this still relevant? Is this still powerful? Has this entered sort of our consciousness as spiritual beings long enough, and it's time to weed it out? Or maybe even, I would say, I could probably say this here, I have a harder time saying it in evangelical contexts, but a God that of original sin, I think, is on the way out. In other words, a human being, I have 3 kids, a human being. That human being enters the world with that first breath, like we just did a few minutes ago, we breathed in. Well, certain versions of original sin say that being is a problem to God, is an ontological problem to God. By its very existence, has a problem to begin with. And God cannot approve, and that being is not worthy. That's the message. I think that's probably gone on long enough. You could probably think of your own toxic images of God. What I'm saying is that typically it's the non-religious people who are criticizing those images, saying, that's why I'm not religious anymore. I'm out of here. What I'm saying is that spiritual communities, churches, have to do their own sort of self-examination. Weed them out ourselves. Just like Heschel says, by the way, don't blame atheism or something like that for the demise of religion. Blame religion. In other words, blame yourself. Blame me as a preacher. So in other words, I think we have some responsibility for cleaning up some of these images of God, these toxic images. I guess I would leave that as a question. What are the toxic ones? And by the way, they're in the Bible. And I'm a big fan of the Bible. I know a lot of people, they're kind of over the Bible. They're like, I don't really get it. I happen to like it. But I like it because it's kind of muddled. It is a mixed up, muddled mess. And it's an interesting mixed up, muddled mess. And it contains some toxic ideas and images of God, and it contains some really beautiful, sacred, I think, true images and ideas of God. It really does. But we have to look at it that way and say, where did these things come from? I don't happen to think like the God in Joshua who basically commands a kind of genocide against enemies is actually the God of the heavens and earth. I think it's the way the human beings were trying to understand their God at that particular time. So anyway, it's a mixed up, muddled mess, which makes it fun. I got 2 more points. I know I was trying to make this like a traditional sermon, like I have 3 points. So point number 1 was, we don't know what we mean by God anymore, and we gotta wander around in that territory for a while, I think. And it's actually kind of a delightful place to wander around. And you probably are doing it a lot better than other communities. Not to, I'm sure you have your own issues and questions as well. But here's the other point. I'm not quite sure how to say this, but I will try. I think we're entering a period in the 21st century with this spiritually minded people, and the spiritual but not religious. They have all kinds of different names, where experience is much more important than belief. And I would actually call that mystical, because a mystic is someone who has an experience of God. They're not thinkers, like I sat down and thought really awesome thoughts about God for a while and wrote them down. Mystics are people who have encounters with the divine, and usually not ones that they manufactured, like, hey, next Tuesday I'm going to go and have a little mystical experience. No, it comes to them as a surprise, like the butterfly, like the moth, out of nowhere. Where did that come from? Where is it going? And so I think this is attractive, and I think religious communities and churches ought to do whatever they can to encourage that desire that's in people, to desire experience over belief. Belief, I mean, come on. How many more years are we going to keep repeating ourselves, I believe, and you can see it now in people's face. I believe, wink, I don't even know what I believe, but you keep saying it over and over again, maybe I think that if I believe long enough, I'm going to experience something. Now, sometimes that happens, but oftentimes it doesn't. So I would say that's what I would call a kind of mystical, something mystical is in the air in the 21st century, where people desire experience, and they don't actually care what you call it, like by what name do we call God. The attraction to this kind of experience, I think, is what's important. So maybe our religious communities can help probe that desire, poke at it, and increase it rather than decrease it. And one way to decrease it is to tell people it's all about belief and doctrine. Just have enough propositions that you check off in a box, and there you'll find God. Well, we all know that doesn't work. So to probe that kind of desire for transcendence, for transcendent encounter. By the way, maybe you're familiar with the author James Finley. He is a psychotherapist, but also he was the directee of Thomas Merton. So he lived in the monastery. He was a monk, and Thomas Merton was his spiritual director. And do you know who Thomas Merton is? I'm sure you do. Seventh Story Mountain. He's amazing. I mean, he's a major influence on my own trajectory. Also by accident. I didn't say, I plan on having Thomas Merton as it just happened one day. Stumbled upon him. But in any case, James Finley says no idea of God is God. Now that is so relieving. No idea of God is God. He doesn't say ideas about God are wrong, but no idea itself is God. All ideas seem to point beyond themselves. To me, that is so liberating. That is such a breath of fresh air, and it's something I think spiritual communities like this one and others can begin to speak to the world. No idea of God is God. There's something even beyond our way of trying to conceive of this thing. All right. Here's my final point. What was point 2? Point 1 was we don't know what we believe by God anymore. Point 2 is experience seems to be far more interesting and attractive than just a set of beliefs and doctrines. Here's point 3. A couple years ago, I read a book, maybe some of you have read it, by Richard Rohr, Franciscan in New Mexico, called Falling Upward. And in it, he talks about the two halves of life. The two halves of life. And this was new to me. I mean, actually, he got it from Jung, turns out. I didn't know that because I wasn't also reading Jung while I was studying the Bible in Israel, although I should have been. In any case, he talks about the two halves of life, the first half of life and the second half of life. And for some reason, as soon as he said that, I was like, man, that sounds attractive. What is he talking about, the two halves of life? First half of life, the second half of life. And Rohr goes on to say a lot of the way we enter the second half of life, adulthood we would call it, is typically through a lot of failure. We sort of have to stumble our way into it, not climb the ladder like we do in the corporate world. I'm going to achieve my way to the second half of life. You usually have to try to achieve, and then you fail, and you find yourself kind of falling into it, hence the name Falling Upward. So the first half of life and the second half of life I think is a real thing. Not that it matters that I think that. But here's my sense. Many, many religious communities are only interested in the first half of life, which I might call a psycho-spiritual adolescent place. So a kind of psycho-spiritual adolescence. That's the first half of life. And what do I mean by that? Here's what I mean. When I was in junior high, here's what mattered to me. The kind of clothes I wore, who my friends were, what other people thought of me, and whether or not I fit in. Now, there's nothing wrong with junior high. I think junior high is awesome. I taught high school for a long time. That's not junior high, I realize, but being an adolescent is an amazing thing. That's exactly what you go through as being an adolescent. But that's where churches also get stuck, in belonging and kind of tribalism. And if you've ever, go back to a high school for a while and walk around and you'll see all the tribes. People think we're beyond tribalism. I say, no, just go to high school. There's a tribe, But what we've done with that reality is extended that and called that adulthood. We've called it adulthood. So tribes, tribalism, political parties, churches, and churches work very hard in saying that measure of belonging, in other words, you know who you are because you fit in here, becomes the only measure of belonging there is. What I'm saying is that runs out. That's what Rohr is saying, and that's what Jung is saying. That's first half of life kind of consciousness, and there's nothing wrong with it. There's just something called the second half of life. And the second half of life is where you get adults, and eventually you get elders. And here's my point in saying all this. Let me check the time, because now I'm starting. I told you I was just getting warmed up. I mentioned Joseph Campbell before. I'm sure you're all familiar with his stuff. And Joseph Campbell says that the hero's journey begins with a leaving home. A leaving home. And what I'm suggesting is many spiritual communities are saying, don't leave. Don't leave home. Whatever you do, and I mean psycho-spiritually, don't leave home. How does that come out? Don't ask any questions. Don't doubt. Don't think for yourself. Believe these 5 things. Sing these songs. Say only these kind of prayers. Take communion in only this particular kind of way. Do these 5 rituals, and then God's going to like you. And you've made it. And that's it. That's the point of life. But what I'd like to suggest is spiritual communities, although they are containers, and there's nothing wrong with that. This is a container. Other churches are containers. They're also places that can cultivate the human soul enough so when it's time for young people to leave, they say, go. And also return. Because that's the trick with the hero's journey, according to Joseph Campbell. The hero goes off down into the abyss, off into the darkness, and returns with a gift for the community. They return with something to give to the world, not to just go away into oblivion, but to return. But as long as our religious communities hang on with everything they have and say, just wear the right clothes for long enough, we're not going to have very many spiritually vibrant communities left, especially, according to the research, when everybody's on the way out. So I think it's one of the great gifts that spiritual communities like this can do for people is the adults here and the elders here can help the rest of us grow up a little bit. Say, yeah, leave, do some wandering, go figure out who you are, go deeper, and return with your gifts. Return with your gifts to make the world a much more safe and gracious and compassionate place. I'll end with just one line from Mary Oliver, or maybe 2 lines, that has been an important part of my own personal journey, and I think helps illustrate what I'm trying to say with this third point. My third point is leave home. I just made up my points in case you couldn't tell that I had 3 points. I made them up as I was going. So my third point is, I guess, leave. Here's what Mary Oliver says at the beginning of the poem, The Journey. One day you finally knew what you had to do, and you began. One day you finally knew what you had to do, and you began. though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, saying, "Mend my life." One day, you finally knew what you had to do and you began. This is what I call the second half of life, the soul starting to creep up from within. There it is. One day you finally knew what you had. There it's come. And maybe we can be the kind of spiritually minded places that say, go. One day you finally knew what you had to do and you began. And we started encouraging one another to take that powerful step into the unknown. That's all I got for you today. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate coming here.
I think what Kent has offered us is a breath in. And what I want to encourage each of us to do this week is to not make the mistake of thinking that he was here offering a word about the evangelical churches and their struggles. If you're like me, he was talking about our church. It's time for us to pause just long enough to take those 3 points and know that they are for us as we breathe this community into life and life abundant for the next millennium to come. Go in peace, friends. May you find the great wonder, and may it make you pause.